In the shadow of Siberia's forgotten mountains, 7 hikers vanished in broad daylight, except one. What she witnessed was so disturbing, it stayed buried for years. The official reports called it hypothermia. But the way they died tells another story. This isn't just another wilderness tragedy. This is a mystery carved in ice, silence and death. And once you hear it, it'll haunt you too. Lyudmila Korovina was not reckless. Far from it. She was a respected survival instructor with the highest category of certification in hiking and mountaineering. She had trained dozens of students, instilled in them the kind of discipline that could mean the difference between glory and a frozen grave. Her past expeditions read like a portfolio of quiet defiance against harsh terrain. Alpine traverses, tiger crossings, long-range treks where few dared go. She believed in preparation. Her students were never idle, never soft. She taught them to read clouds like books, to hear wind like warnings. She believed that nature could be respected, but never trusted. Among her 6 young charges were her daughter Svetlana, just 17 and already adept at wilderness travel, and Alexander, a wiry young man with a ready laugh and a runner's pace. The others were just as capable. Tatiana, Denis, Victoria and Timur, each chosen, each trained. Some had hiked with Korovina before. All had survived brutal Siberian excursions that would break most adults. All these were to say that they are not amateurs. They left from the city of Minusinsk, moving southeast, travelling by train, then on foot, carrying everything they would need for 10 days. Tents, canned goods, kerosene, medicine, maps. On paper their route was sound. They'd follow the Kara-Murin River basin, pass through the Kamar-Daban Ridge, then loop back toward Irkutsk. A manageable, if demanding, journey for hikers of their skill level. And at first, everything followed the rhythm of a typical Siberian trek. There were the usual challenges: mud-clogged trails, erratic weather, chill winds that scoured even the thickest outerwear. But the group was in high spirits. Valentina Utochenko, the only survivor, later recalled laughter around the campfire, shared songs and stories, bonding over their love of hiking. On the 6th day, they met another group of hikers, a second student expedition led by Korovina's colleague. They camped together for one night, shared tea, and compared route notes. Nothing seemed amiss. Then the groups parted ways. The Korovina group veered west toward the ridge. The other group turned south. That was the last time anyone saw them alive. On the morning of August 5th, the Korovina group was expected to begin their descent. The sky had been overcast, but the weather reports suggested no serious storms. The wind picked up early, strong but not alarming. It was just silence, but then the silence stretched too long. By August 6th, no word had come from the Korovina group. No check-ins, no radio chatter. The other hiking group they had split from days earlier expected to see them descend by afternoon, but the ridge remained empty. At first they assumed the weather had caused delays. Maybe the winds had forced the group to camp early. Maybe their equipment had failed. But with each passing hour, unease began to spread like mist through the trees. By the second night, the concern turned to dread. Forest rangers were notified. Locals joined the search. Helicopters couldn't fly in the thick fog that clung to the slopes, so they combed the edges on foot, shouting names into the void. No tracks, no tents, no gear. Just cold wind and the oppressive silence of the Siberian wild. Then, on the 3rd day, something emerged from the trees. Valentina. She looked like something dragged from another world. Her eyes were sunken, her skin windburned and split. Her voice was gone. Her hands were trembling. All she could do was fall into the arms of a stranger and weep. When they asked her what had happened, she shook her head and mumbled something they couldn't understand. It took hours to get her back to the nearest village. Only then, under warm blankets and after spoonfuls of broth, did she begin to speak. And what she said was worse than anyone had imagined. What happened next cannot be reconstructed with certainty. There are no camera rolls, no journal entries, no final radio calls. Only Valentina's testimony, fragments of memory splintered by trauma, and the cold clarity of autopsy reports retrieved days later. According to Valentina, the first to collapse was Alexander. They had just finished a short breakfast, preparing to move toward the pass, when he stumbled, clutched to his throat and fell. Blood streamed from his eyes and nose. His muscles locked into a grotesque rigor, and he began to convulse violently, his body seizing in a storm of spasms that lasted less than a minute. Then stillness. Svetlana, Lyudmila's daughter, screamed. Others backed away, unsure whether to help or run. Within minutes, Tatiana collapsed too. Then Denis. Then Timur. One after another, like dominoes in reverse. No time to think. Just the sound of bodies hitting the ground and the awful chorus of panicked breathing. Valentina remembered Lyudmila kneeling beside her daughter, muttering prayers, slapping her cheeks, trying to revive her. Then Lyudmila herself began to twitch, small at first, then violent, as if some invisible circuit had been overloaded. She clutched her chest, tore at her own clothing, and foamed at the mouth. Within an hour, 5 were dead. And then there was Victoria. She didn't collapse, not right away. Instead, she ran, mad-eyed, barefoot, screaming nonsense into the trees. Valentina followed her. It was instinct, maybe loyalty, maybe fear of being alone. The two of them fled, not knowing where they were running or what they were running from. They just ran. They stumbled downhill for hours. Victoria eventually stopped, dropped to her knees and wailed into her hands. She kept saying she couldn't see, that her eyes were burning. Then her words stopped making sense. By nightfall, she was dead too. Valentina was now alone, 19 years old, numb, sleep-deprived, freezing. Her boots lost in the chaos, her food gone, her leader and friends dead. She curled beneath a tree and waited for the cold to take her. But it didn't. She survived. Maybe by chance, maybe by will. Or maybe the thing that had killed the others had simply finished its work and moved on. 3 days later, she stumbled into the camp of the other hiking group, the one they had parted ways with. Her face was cracked from the sun and wind. Her clothes were torn. She couldn't speak at first, only cry. They took her in, carried her to the nearest settlement, and called the authorities. Rescue teams launched the next day. What they found on the ridge would haunt them. 6 bodies, scattered, exposed. 2 were partially clothed, as if they had torn off garments in desperation. One had a crushed skull, another had ruptured lungs but no external trauma. There were signs of internal bleeding, pulmonary edema, and acute stress. Some had injuries consistent with a fall. Others had no marks at all, just lifeless in the open air, as if snuffed out by an unseen hand. The scene made no sense. Their supplies were still intact. Tents had not been pitched. No bear tracks, no avalanche signs, no landslides. The weather had been harsh but survivable. There was no reason for all 6 to die within such a tight time frame, unless something catastrophic and instantaneous had occurred. But there was no explosion, no poison, no enemy, just silence. The autopsies deepened the mystery. Alexander's body showed severe signs of hypoxia, which is a lack of oxygen. His lungs were filled with fluid, as if he had drowned from within. Lyudmila's cause of death was labelled hypothermia, but her body was found twisted, contorted, with torn muscles in her limbs suggesting intense spasms or convulsions before death. Victoria's eyes were bloodshot. The coroner reported evidence of acute stress and capillary rupture in the brain, often associated with seizures or chemical exposure. But there was no known toxin, no traces of drugs or spoiled food, no pathogens. All their rations were sealed and untouched. One medical examiner noted the peculiar condition of their tongues, swollen, discoloured. Another noted skin sloughing off the hands like a low-grade burn. Yet again, no fire, no acid, no cause. The official report listed hypothermia aggravated by psychological stress as the cause of death. But off the record, many involved in the investigation admitted it didn't add up. Hypothermia doesn't make 6 people die violently, in different ways within hours. It doesn't explain why trained hikers would abandon shelter, run blindly downhill, or lie still in the open air. In later interviews, Valentina spoke of a feeling in the air that morning. Pressure. Like the sky was pressing down. Like the trees were too quiet. She said she felt her heartbeat in her teeth. That the air didn't taste right. None of this made it into the official statements. What did appear quietly in internal memos were notes from the search teams, things they didn't release to the press. One team claimed their compasses spun erratically at the site. Another reported temporary blackouts in their radios. One hiker, a volunteer, claimed he felt watched the entire time he was there. Something just felt weird, even by their standards. The case was closed without ceremony. No press conference, no special documentary, no memorial service, just a stack of papers stamped, filed, and slowly forgotten. But those who had seen the ridge, who had stood among the dead, knew something had gone terribly wrong. Something that left no footprints, something that made no sound. The weight of what Valentina Utochenko carried didn't stop with her descent from the mountains. It radiated outward, seeping into official channels, press reports, and quiet conversations among investigators who knew better than to believe what was written on paper. Something didn't add up. Not then, not now. The bodies had been collected, the reports had been filed. Yet in the corridors of local administration and the offices of experienced mountaineers, whispers began. Whispers about what could make 6 young, healthy people collapse, with bleeding mouths and convulsions in a remote mountain pass. Whispers about the other incidents, the other strange deaths that had never made the news. And in time, a darker pattern began to emerge. The first theory to gain traction was environmental poisoning. The area around the Kamar Daban range, though pristine in appearance, sat uncomfortably close to several industrial zones, chemical plants, mining operations, and old military sites from the Soviet era. Some experts believed that an invisible toxin, like carbon monoxide or even hydrogen sulfide, could have been released from underground, carried by shifting weather patterns, or disturbed by seismic activity. In Cameroon at Lake Nyos, a catastrophic event in 1986 killed 1,746 people and thousands of animals when a massive cloud of CO2 burst from the lake bed and suffocated everything in its path. The victims simply fell where they stood. No wounds, no warning, no chance. Could something similar have happened in the Kamar Daban? If a sudden release of toxic gas had surged through the forest, low to the ground, it might have incapacitated the group before they could even register what was happening. Some would seize, some would collapse. Some, disoriented, might run. And if Korovina's group had set camp in a pocket where the gas had settled, there would be little escape. But this theory had cracks. Autopsies showed signs of hypothermia and pulmonary edema, but not the internal signs usually associated with gas poisoning. No telltale damage to lung tissue, no residue, no metabolic irregularities that would accompany carbon dioxide poisoning. The terrain didn't include a volcanic lake like Nyos, and there were no known reports of gas emissions in the area, either before or after the event. If there had been a poisonous cloud, why had Valentina survived? Why was she spared while standing feet from the others? It didn't hold. Another explanation looked skyward. Some proposed that the group had been struck by lightning, or more precisely, by a lightning-induced electrical field. The Kamar Daban range was no stranger to storms. The hikers were in an exposed area when the weather turned, and a lightning strike could produce powerful electromagnetic pulses that can stun, disorient, or even kill. Supporters of this theory pointed to the sudden onset of symptoms like spasms, screaming, bleeding. The fact that some of the victims were partially unclothed may have indicated an electrical discharge. It could even explain the presence of internal damage without visible trauma. Yet this idea too stumbled. Lightning leaves a mark, trees explode, rocks split, ground chars. None of these signs were present at the site. Investigators found no burns, no melted gear, no singed clothing. There was rain, but no evidence of an electrical storm intense enough to wipe out a group and leave no scars. So if it wasn't gas, and it wasn't lightning, attention turned inward, to the group itself. Could there have been a breakdown? Could panic alone destroy 7 people? Psychologists proposed that what occurred might have been a case of mass hysteria or acute panic disorder, triggered by one member's sudden collapse. In this scenario, the theory goes, Sasha Kruisin, possibly suffering from undiagnosed altitude sickness or cardiac issues, collapsed violently. The sight of him bleeding and seizing triggered a domino effect: panic, confusion, and flight. Korovina, a woman of discipline and pressure, may have misread the moment, trying to enforce control instead of calming fears. Her shouting could have escalated the terror. The group, overwhelmed by shock, might have entered a shared psychotic state. Disoriented, hallucinating, and in full physiological meltdown. The cold rain, the altitude, and the exhaustion could have pushed their bodies beyond the threshold. But mass hysteria does not usually result in death. Not like this. It doesn't cause pulmonary edema. It doesn't make you bleed from the eyes. It doesn't kill 6 people and spare the 7th. Valentina's story made clear that whatever killed her friends wasn't just psychological. She described physical symptoms, violent seizures, foaming, and discoloured skin. She didn't speak of madness. She spoke of a force that tore through them like a chemical fire, with no warning and no mercy. Still, the psychological theory persisted in some circles, not because it explained everything, but because it was one of the few explanations that didn't require accepting the impossible. Then came the quiet voices, the ones who looked not to science but to the secrets buried by governments. Some believed the group had accidentally wandered into a restricted area. Siberia is riddled with military installations, old Soviet research stations, and unmarked test zones. Maps are unreliable. Areas marked as hiking trails can abruptly border classified land. What if the group had triggered a buried sensor? What if they had stepped into a chemical or biological zone that had long been forgotten? There were rumours of nerve agents tested during the Cold War, weapons designed to paralyse rather than kill or to leave no trace. The symptoms Valentina described, seizing, foaming, panic, were eerily close to VX gas exposure. In such a case, contact with a contaminated object or plant could lead to rapid neurological collapse. Death within minutes. No scent, no colour, no warning. But this theory had its flaws too. Investigators found no trace of contamination, no chemicals, no tampering with the bodies. The area, though remote, was not marked as restricted. And again, why had Valentina survived entirely unaffected? Then came the most controversial theory of all. Some looked at the Korovina group incident not as a standalone tragedy, but as a part of a pattern. You see, in 1959, just north of the Kamar-Daban range, another group of hikers met a violent and unexplained end in the Ural Mountains. 9 bodies were found under bizarre conditions. Torn tents, internal injuries without external trauma, radiation, missing tongues, scattered corpses. The Dyatlov Pass incident. The similarities were uncanny. Both groups were experienced. Both perished under mysterious circumstances. Both showed signs of intense internal trauma, yet with no clear cause. Both left behind one survivor. In the years since, Dyatlov has become a subject of folklore, conspiracy, and obsession. Could the Korovina case be part of the same phenomenon? Some researchers quietly and cautiously suggested that both groups were exposed to a natural but undocumented geophysical event, perhaps infrasound. Infrasound is low-frequency sound beneath the threshold of human hearing. Under specific conditions, it can be generated by wind passing over mountain peaks, creating powerful waves that penetrate the body. Laboratory experiments have shown that infrasound can induce anxiety, unease, nausea, and even hallucinations. Theorists proposed that both the Dyatlov and Korovina groups might have experienced infrasound-related panic. Disoriented, sick, and terrified, their behaviour unravelled. They ran, collapsed, and died. The problem is, infrasound doesn't kill, it unsettles, it disturbs. But it does not cause bleeding from the mouth, seizures, or death within minutes. The symptoms didn't match. The theory couldn't stand alone. But over the years, other patterns began to emerge. In 1997, 4 hikers in the Altai Mountains, just a few hundred kilometers west, were found dead in their tents. Their bodies showed signs of trauma, but no outward wounds. 1 had a crushed chest. 2 had ruptured blood vessels in the eyes. The official cause was listed as exposure. But locals noted the date. Almost 4 years to the day since the Korovina incident. In 2001, a group of geologists reported that their instruments picked up strange readings, sudden magnetic surges, near the same ridge. The surges were too strong to be natural, but no equipment on Earth could have caused them. Not legally anyway. And in 2014, a satellite passed over the Kamar-Daban range, registered an unusual heat signature, one that lasted only moments, but registered temperatures inconsistent with any natural phenomena in the area. Officials dismissed it as a glitch. By now, the Korovina case had taken on a new shape. It wasn't just an isolated tragedy, It was a node in a larger web, a breadcrumb in a trail of unexplained patterns that reached far beyond one ridge, one tent, or one girl running barefoot through the woods. The survivor Valentina never gave another interview. Some say she moved to Belarus. Others claim she returned to Irkutsk and changed her name. To this day, no one knows for sure where she is or whether she ever hiked again. And just like we started, we ended confused. Valentina never publicly commented on these theories. She spoke to investigators. She confirmed the timeline, described the symptoms, and identified the bodies. Then she left. Perhaps she knew what happened, or perhaps she knew that knowing wouldn't matter, that people would twist her memory to fit their own narrative. Those who worked on the case never quite moved on. For them, it was more than a mystery. It was a haunting. Some of the search and rescue team members who recovered the bodies reportedly refused to speak about the scene. One man, who remained anonymous, told a local paper years later that what he saw in the clearing didn't belong to this world. He refused to elaborate. Another investigator, when asked if the deaths could be explained by natural causes, simply said, "Not all things can be explained." The area around the site has become a kind of unspoken taboo. Local hikers avoid it. Even experienced guides steer clear. They don't talk about it openly, but they don't go there either. As time passed, the story faded from public memory. By 1990, Russia was in turmoil, politically, economically, and socially. News moved quickly. People were exhausted. Another mountain tragedy, tragic though it was, didn't make international headlines. Not like Dyatlov. But those who remember know that something happened in the Kamar Daban that defies logic. It wasn't panic, it wasn't poison. It wasn't a storm or a predator. It was something else. In the years that followed, bits of information resurfaced. Re-examinations, late interviews, autopsy report fragments leaked online. The puzzle remained unsolved, but the pieces continued to shift. One such piece emerged from the mouth of an ex-military official who claimed the area near the Korovina group's route had been involved in Soviet-era weapons testing. Not missiles or landmines, but psychological operations, acoustic weapons, directed energy fields, devices designed not to kill outright, but to disorient, manipulate and induce fear in enemy combatants. The kind of tech meant to make soldiers turn on each other without knowing why. He said the research had been scrapped, but the field sites remained, forgotten, unmanned and highly unstable. His claim was never substantiated, but it struck a nerve. The symptoms matched: convulsions, vomiting, paranoia and aggression. Sudden breakdown of group cohesion. It sounded like a weapon engineered not just to cause death, but madness. If that technology existed, it would explain why no official conclusions were ever reached, why the investigation closed so quickly, why files went missing, and why Valentina disappeared from public view, but there was no physical evidence, no machine, no radiation, no disturbed ground, just bodies and a story too strange to process. And so attention returned, quietly, almost reluctantly, to something older, less scientific, more primal. Some Siberian locals, particularly the indigenous Buryat people, believed that the mountains in question were sacred and dangerous, places where spirits lingered, where humans were not welcome. The Kamar Daban range, in their tradition, was not simply terrain. It was a boundary, a place where the material and the spiritual bled into one another, a threshold. And sometimes people crossed it. There were tales centuries old of hunters who vanished under clear skies, of entire nomadic families found frozen in unnatural positions, mouths open, eyes wide, skin strangely marked. These were not metaphors, these were stories passed down in hushed tones, not to entertain, but to remember. When locals heard about the Korovina group, they weren't surprised. The symptoms, madness, bleeding, silence, matched what their grandfathers had warned about. They didn't call it an accident, they called it trespass. They said there are places you don't sleep, places where the wind doesn't blow but the trees still move, places where, if you listen closely, the mountain speaks back. Sometimes it just watches, other times it takes. This wasn't the kind of thing that made it into police reports, but it was the kind of thing people listened to, even if they pretended not to. In 2012, nearly 2 decades after the incident, a hiker by the name of Igor Lobov retraced the Korovina group's last known route. He wasn't an investigator or a conspiracy theorist, just a former soldier, curious about the story, haunted by what he'd heard as a boy. He carried a camera, a journal, and 3 weeks' worth of supplies. His plan was simple: reach the site, document the terrain, and understand how 6 people could die in one of the most remote, peaceful-looking places in all of Russia. He made it to the ridge, recorded footage of the mossy hillside where Valentina said it all happened. Nothing unusual. No bones, no rusted gear, just trees, wind, and silence. But on his 3rd night near the ridge, Lobov wrote something unusual in his journal. He described hearing breathing, not animal, not wind, rhythmic, human, slow. It circled his tent twice. He unzipped the flap. Nothing. He said he felt watched, not paranoid, but observed, like a lab rat behind one-way glass. He moved camps the next day. Then silence in the journal. No further entries. Lobov returned safely, but he never published the footage. In a rare interview 3 years later, he said, "I found what I was looking for. That's enough." When asked what he meant, he simply replied, "We weren't supposed to be there." The interviewer pressed him on whether he believed the hikers were killed by something unnatural. Lobov laughed but didn't answer. But I believe he found the answer. You see, there was a detail in Valentina's story, one often glossed over. In one version of her interview, she described Lyudmila as looking not herself. She said her mentor's voice had changed, that she moved in strange, jerky motions, as if something inside her was breaking down but trying to hold shape, as if she wasn't guiding the group anymore, but being guided herself. It didn't match with the Lyudmila others knew. Experienced, calm, deeply spiritual. Something had taken place in that gap between sunrise and horror. Here's what most people don't know. Months before the trip, Lyudmila Korovina had visited a remote Buddhist temple in Tuva. The monks there were known to offer spiritual advice to travellers and forest guides. She had been there before, seeking blessings before past expeditions. But this time she stayed longer. Locals said she left with more than just prayer beads. They claimed she took something, an object wrapped in cloth, never unwrapped. It may have been a relic, or simply superstition. But for whatever reason, she kept it in her pack during the journey. According to Valentina, it was never far from her side. What it was remains unknown. After the incident, the item was never recovered. If it was there at all, it disappeared with Lyudmila's body. Some say the monks had warned her not to take it, that it wasn't meant to leave the temple. Another layer to an already tangled mystery. In the years following the deaths, many hikers reported vivid dreams after visiting the ridge. Not nightmares, at least, not always. More like transmissions, symbols, sounds that didn't resemble language but felt deeply familiar. A few reported seeing figures, shadows at the edge of campfires. Not animals, not people. Something in between. They'd vanish the moment you tried to look directly, always watching from just outside the light. These stories didn't make it into the guidebooks, but among experienced mountaineers, the Kamar Daban Ridge took on a reputation. Not cursed, not haunted, just different, unstable in ways no map could show. And then there was the footage. In 2017, a small documentary team attempted to make a short film about the Korovina group. They filmed on-site interviews, aerial footage, and some staged reconstructions. On the final night of shooting, they left a motion-activated camera pointed toward the slope, just to get a clean time-lapse of stars over the ridge. The next morning, the camera was still recording, but the lens was cracked. The last 6 seconds of footage showed nothing clearly, just shapes, a stuttering blur, and a low-frequency sound no one could identify. The audio engineer called it a breath caught in a scream. The footage was never used. The documentary was shelved. Usually I give both logical and illogical sides, but in this story, even the logical side is dumbfounded. Because sure, you could bring up a theory that makes sense, like infrasound, but it doesn't explain the violent nature of their death. In the late 2010s, a digital resurgence occurred. Reddit threads, YouTube videos, and obscure forums began dissecting the Korovina group incident, with a fervour previously reserved for the Dyatlov Pass. Online detectives pored over topographic maps. They compared satellite images from 1993 with recent ones. They used 3D modelling software to simulate how a storm might have cornered the hikers or how avalanches might have occurred. Some went further. They matched the symptoms reported in the autopsies with rare diseases, things like St. Anthony's fire, caused by ergot poisoning. A fungus found on rye that can induce hallucinations, muscle spasms, and even death. It was a tempting theory, clean, chemical, plausible. But the group wasn't eating rye. They weren't even near agricultural areas. The food they brought was dry goods and canned meat. The theory didn't stick. Others suggested toxins in the water, a mineral runoff perhaps, or biological contamination from an underground spring. But the rivers tested clean when search teams finally reached the area. If something had poisoned them, it left no trace. That left something else, something beyond mold and minerals. The terrain where the group camped, just beneath the ridge, was oddly shaped. Locals call it the saddle. Two slopes meet in a dip that looks calm but behaves strangely. Compasses jitter there. Watches lose seconds. Some say the birds don't fly over it. There's no signal. Phones die faster, batteries drain without reason. It's not superstition. In 2006, a rescue team testing GPS equipment in the area reported anomalies. Devices blinking out, readings shifting by entire degrees. They sent the gear back to the manufacturer, thinking it was defective. The replacement equipment malfunctioned in the same way, but only on that ridge. That's when the theory of magnetic interference gained traction. Something underground. A pocket of magnetite, maybe. Or something else. A remnant of an ancient impact. An ore vein that disrupts electrical flow. Enough to disturb instruments. Maybe enough to affect the human brain. Sudden nausea. Hallucinations. Disorientation. Even aggression. All could be induced by altered electromagnetic fields, especially in high concentrations. Especially if you're sleeping directly on top of it. But even this had holes. Why hadn't any hikers before or since experienced the same violent breakdown? Dozens had passed through the same area before 1993. None had died like that. And the survivors of similar terrain had never reported the kind of mania the Korovina group exhibited. So every theory skeptic brings to explain how logical this is only paints half the picture, and not the whole thing. And the one witness was so traumatized that she left the country. Honestly, this is one confusing case where there is no logical answer to what happened to these people. In the end, the Korovina group incident remains suspended in that rare air where fact and folklore mix so completely that no clean version of the story can ever be retrieved. Was it an accident? A rare convergence of natural forces? A slow, silent killer hiding in plain sight? Or was it something else? They say only time will tell, but I think in this case time is also confused as we are.